Tens of thousands of football fans came to Highbury. Electrifying!
Yes, guys, and welcome back to the Cannon Podcast. Hope you're all doing well. Hope you are all good. We've just recorded the final data pod of the season, and it was great to do. Well, in terms of the season, it's not been great for sure, but doing the podcast, I've really enjoyed it throughout the season with George, and we've been able to build this narrative and the portfolio of different podcasts as the season has gone, and we've reviewed it, and we've looked upon the things that we can improve on by looking at different metrics, going into attacking performance, also the things that we've done well in terms of defensively. And we've discussed a lot of different things where we've looked upon what we've been doing the two previous campaigns and looking to draw comparisons and areas in which we can improve on and what we can kind of take forward into 25-26. And if you want to see that content, you can access that pod and also all the other pods such as Scouted, youth pods. There's a lot of Scouted that's actually at the moment with George and Alex doing overtime because of the number of links that keep being put out with Berta certainly doing his thing there. And you can access all that content via the free trial that you can get within the comment section, within the description of this video. And yeah, there's so much content that is currently being put out there from the Cannon Podcast, and you can be able to access all that via the free trial, and that's for YouTube and Patreon members. And yeah, so it's been a really good, enjoyable one to do today. And yeah, the mastermind behind it all is the wonderful George. How are you, George?
Yeah, I'm doing very well. Yeah, it's been really good season, like you say, and particularly to do the last hour or so that we've recorded, kind of doing a review has been really interesting as well. So yeah, it's been good.
No, it's been really good. And yeah, we've been drawing a lot of different comparisons with the two previous campaigns, also looking at Liverpool, Man City and how they fared on different things. And yeah, so why don't you show us what we're going to look to present here to you guys, which is looking at Arsenal effectively during adversity and also comparing it to Liverpool, Man City, and how they fared in previous seasons, but more importantly, looking at what Liverpool have been able to do this season. So, and yeah, why don't you walk us through what you've got?
Yeah, of course. Firstly, can you see my screen?
I can indeed, yes.
Perfect. So we went through loads of different things, and I think obviously there's some big narratives around drawing too many games, and we looked at the types of teams that we were drawing at, and what percentage of game time that we were in this drawing game state and our kind of production whilst drawing and everything. But I think for the sort of the shorter YouTube video, an area that we really wanted to explore, because we just haven't, these types of stats that we're going to go through aren't necessarily stuff that I've seen too much elsewhere. And what this view shows is points lost from a winning game state. So just to explain that, what it's looking at is a count of all of the games where a team, so for Arsenal, were at least at a certain point in a winning game state. Yeah. And then just looking at what was then the end result of that game. And so if we actually go through into the first table here that's looking at last season's performance, firstly, you can see that in terms of a number of games, there were 30 games this year that we were in a winning game state to at least at one point during the match, of which of those 30 games, we ended up winning 20 of them. So that's 2/3. But then, I think this obviously points a lot to the volume of draws that we had this season. Whilst we're in a winning game state, we actually ended up drawing 9 of those 30 games. And then that one loss, I believe that was the Bournemouth game as well, where we were up ahead and then
yes, it was.
They lost. So out of all of that, that's cost us 21 points, where you were in a winning, in a position where you would have won the game, but actually the outcome cost us 21 points this season, which then if you compare kind of year on year, it is expected that, just because you're winning a game doesn't mean that you guaranteed to finish winning. But again, just the amount of points and thinking obviously about how far we ended up behind Liverpool. One of the things that was interesting to talk about on the longer pod that we did is just that kind of game management side around you're in a winning position, but how can you then increase the chance of that being the case that you'll win the game?
Yeah, I think for me, it's kind of like your ability to kill the game off and leaving no doubt there, and when you leave it at 1-0 with a 1-goal deficit, it opens up that possibility. And we've seen it many times in which teams have been able to kind of claw that back. And I mentioned it to you in the recording that we did for Patreon YouTube members, where this at surface level is not a team that deserves to win a Premier League title, and when you consider actually the two previous campaigns, I mean, look at the level that we reached there. It's very much in line with what you need to do to be able to win a Premier League title. And that's why I do feel we were very unlucky to not be able to get over the line in 22-23 and the 23-24 campaign. And if you look at Liverpool, actually, we surpassed Liverpool in the two previous campaigns to what they've done this season. So they've also dropped a lot of points from winning positions, but we just did it a little bit too much, and that's the biggest frustration for me. And yeah, the percentage that you show there, this is really good to look at, and where you see it in terms of looking at Man City, for example, last season, the previous season, we're doing very well in this scenario. So it's a little bit of an anomaly that we've seen this season, but something that we shouldn't kind of like have that ostrich effect mindset of not looking at, where yes, there have been games this season in which I think refereeing decisions and external factors have certainly influenced it, but ultimately 21 points, that is not just all down to external factors. That is something, as you alluded to and what we mentioned in the recording, that there are things that we can manage better, whether it's the tempo of the play, whether it's in-game substitutions when we are a little bit more healthy. That those are the sorts of things that we can certainly do better. A plan B, going along a different avenue in terms of creating more threat, and we've not been able to do that enough in winning scenarios, and we've not been able to put teams to bed for sure.
Yeah, you've highlighted that kind of season-on-season win rate,
yeah.
And that's been a big drop off of only winning 2/3 of the games that you were ahead in. It is interesting that whilst obviously City have had a similar challenging sort of year-on-year season, but just overall that it is lower than the previous years.
Yeah.
And so maybe that also speaks just to the competitiveness of the league as well, that even if you're winning, you can't sort of take
no
any of these games for granted as well.
Yeah, for sure.
I think, that this is just looking at these points year on year as well. And again, Liverpool did lose a good number of points from winning positions as well, but that's already 5 points in terms of the gap of 10. Yeah.
Yeah. And when we go to points gained as well, this is where, there's a lot more discussion as well for me. And yeah, why don't you walk us through what you've presented here?
Yeah, so this is essentially the inverse. So this is doing firstly a count of the number of games where we were in a losing game state. And I think the first thing to say, if I just reorder it, is throughout all of the teams in the Premier League last season, we had the fewest games where we were actually at any point losing.
Yeah.
Which I think obviously then we mentioned on the main recording about that defensive stability. And I don't think our issue has been this season around losing too many games, I don't think, because, we obviously lost the same amount as Liverpool did. But it's also then, okay, you're in that losing game state. What's the character?
Yeah.
In terms of then turning that into a favourable result.
Yeah.
So if I go back and just rank it again by just the volume of points gained, we're sort of mid-table. And obviously, we've had fewer games where we have been losing. But if you look at that kind of that season on season, the 2022-23 season, we managed to turn 42%, 4 times out of 10. We if we were losing, we would have turned that into a win.
Yeah.
And that was, that's obviously dropped off in the last 2 seasons as well. Whereas, in Liverpool's case, who obviously were chasing and always keeping an eye on City as well, are, just, I guess, feel feel more comfortable when they are losing, that they still feel that they've got a strong chance to still get a result out of it. So this was sort of that analysis on that. And yeah, I'd be interested in your thoughts on it.
Yeah, so I think there's a lot to discuss here. I mean, firstly, the season upon season comparison is a really good way to show how we have dropped off in this regard in terms of our ability to react during adversity. And I've mentioned this many times in terms of when we're looking into 25, 26 and areas of growth and improvement to be able to bridge that gap. This is certainly one of the big drivers. I mean, like last season, for example, 23, 24, you look at Arsenal post-January onwards, I'll maintain that 22-23 Arsenal was the most exciting for me as an Arsenal fan, but 23-24 post-January was the most complete Arsenal that I saw. And the numbers don't lie in terms of Arsenal operating at 100-point pace. Now, City managed to win the league that season because from December onwards, they were operating at 102-point pace, which is ridiculous. These numbers are crazy, right? But I think if you ask people outside of Arsenal fans, outside of Man City fans, who are watching Arsenal Man City closely from that period, I'd say people would feel like Arsenal are playing the better football. But Man City, I think the biggest driver that they've had is their ability to react in adversity and that level of inevitability. And you see that with the 54% success rate that they have, where, like, I don't know about you, but it's that feeling you get, when you're in there, you're hoping for a team to drop points. We're hoping for Man City to drop points, and they go a goal down, but you feel like they're still going to win this, and they go on to win it. They're still going to win it. You don't get that feeling with Arsenal. Like, you don't get that feeling this season. You don't necessarily get that feeling last season as well in certain moments, and that's why I felt like the biggest problem that we've had in the Mikel tenure is clusters of results building and our ability to not react quick enough. Like we saw last season, right? For me, the Aston Villa game was not where Arsenal lost the league at home, in the latter stages of the season. The Man City point was not where Arsenal lost the league. That's a fantastic point. Where Arsenal lost the league, and it's daft to think of it like this, is they lost it in December where they had that cluster against West Ham, Fulham, and Liverpool. A point at Anfield is always a good point. But when you have that sandwiched in between Liverpool and Fulham, Fulham and West Ham, and you're not able to win any of those games, that's where it becomes difficult to really bridge the gap when the margins are so fine and teams are performing at a ridiculous level. And this season as well, you've seen again, we're not reacting well enough in unfavourable circumstances. And Mikel's alluded to it on the Men in Blazers podcast, and I've mentioned this many times, where what he wants Arsenal to become is this team that is totally dominant, where even not at their best day, there's a level of inevitability. And I actually felt that we were starting to see that at the start of the campaign. I don't know if you remember at Villa Park, where we won that game 2-0, but I felt we kind of scammed that game. Like there was some big moments that Aston Villa had where David Raya had to pull off some really big saves. And that's a perfect example of where we're not at our best, but we were able to find a way. And we've not been able to do that since 22-23, where, like the Fulham game, the Liverpool game, there's so many different examples there where I feel the tempo of play increased and there was a lot more speed, there was a lot more invention, especially with sometimes Mikel going with more two nominal strikers to pin the centre-backs with Nketiah coming on. Just a lot of different things that I was seeing then that I would certainly like to see more going into the next campaign. And I think there is a caveat in terms of the injuries in which the manager is not able to bring on the desired personnel that he wanted to because they're injured. But it is something that I think has become a trend in general when we go back to last season. I do think that it's kind of that balance as well, where we don't want to always be in a poor losing game state, but it's going to happen. And when it happens, we need to do better. And that's certainly one of the things we're going to improve on.
I mean, for sure. I mean, I think, as I mentioned, with the lowest number of times this season in a losing game state, and one of the other views we looked at was just share of minutes.
Yeah.
And again, that's still very low. I guess it is quite rare for us to be in a losing game state. But again, if you're thinking of just how many points you're then recovering, it's obviously very different to how Liverpool and City as well perform this season. I think the other thing that would be really worth, particularly going back to the points lost, and something that we went into more detail, and maybe I can briefly show now, is obviously just the high volume of draws that we made, and particularly now with this insight that we were on a lot of times in a winning position, and that ended up being a draw rather than a sort of a draw feeling like a win because you're coming from behind.
Yeah.
I think the other thing, just very quickly, if I can remember where I put it, is Also, just the nature of where those draws were occurring, particularly when you compare last season to the previous season.
Yeah.
And it's, if you're looking at those results and just obviously everything in yellow is a draw, obviously, it's all coming against this sort of mid-table group of teams.
Yeah.
And, against the top teams this season, I think it's been a very comparative performance. And even if you're drawing with Liverpool, you're obviously taking away points from them as well. It's this area where a lot of the draws were occurring. And again, we go through on the main pod around, some of the specifics when you actually analyze some of these particular games, such as Brighton, and obviously, Bournemouth, I think we deservedly did the double on this season, but also Everton as well. And so I think, when thinking ahead to next season, and again, there's lots of areas that we talked about in terms of improving, particularly around output, particularly around, obviously maintaining those numbers and standard defensively. But it's also just this, firstly, this idea of how we're managing games, and particularly around when we're in moments of adversity, but also just the level of, I don't know what it is, the preparation, the performance against some of these teams as well.
100%. And would you say that for you is kind of like when we're going upon reflecting on the season and looking at 25, 26, that for you is something that you'd certainly want to see a significant improve on and the biggest driver?
Yeah, I think, when you're obviously this previous season, what did we finish on? It was 89 points, and this season we finished on 74. So that's the 15-point swing. So one of the things that we've been doing, on an ongoing basis is always benchmarking Arsenal's performance this season to what was the performance last season, and sort of using that as a way to be able to gauge over a longer time period whether we're seeing improvements. And, when I put this view together, the thing that obviously really stood out was just this area. And it's obviously easier said than done. I think Alex's favorite quote is the opponents get to do tactics too. And I think a lot of these teams have developed a blueprint to play against us as well, which we'll need to find solutions for.
100%. And I think when I'm looking at going into 25, 26 in all competitions as well, and we spoke in depth about this in terms of specific tweaks and things I'd personally like to see as where, when we're looking at what we need to do in order to bridge that gap, number one is to increase the quality of our front line. I've mentioned it on main podcast where when you look at Arsenal's backline, for me, the beauty of Arsenal's backline outside of the key pillars of Gabriel and Saliba, who are just colossal and, world-class standard, is the variety of skill sets that we have across the backline that allows us to combat different game states. We don't have that in the front line. We haven't invested enough money in order to get to that level. And now is the time for us to be able to really spend significant sums there in order to bridge that gap. Because we mentioned it in the main Patreon YouTube recording where, you look at other players of other teams, like Man City, Liverpool, and Chelsea, and their forwards are in the quadrants that you want to be within the charts, whereas Arsenal don't have enough of them. So for me, signing greater quality across the front line is a must. And with that, when we're talking about the types of players that I want to see, is players who can generate shots from a standstart and are able to shoot on sight with fantastic ball striking. We need more ball strikers at the club. And we looked at a specific chart that we've highlighted in the previous data pod, where we're looking at Arsenal in terms of the number of shots on goal they're having relative to the number of touches that they are having per shot. And Arsenal, statistically, in terms of box situations, they take more touches than any other team in the Premier League. And this is where I have this idea of Arsenal playing their food too much. And for me, that is more down to player quality and the ability to get shots off quickly and playing with instinct. I don't think we have enough of that, and I don't think we have enough clean ball strikers at the club. And again, you can access that by looking at that discussion that we went really in depth on. And then the other thing for me is kind of like internally, I feel like, again, I don't like this ostrich effect mindset of, not looking at information that could be really harmful to us, that we can resolve internally, and instead just looking upon external things of, signings. And signings are certainly the biggest driver. But I think for me, player usage, against teams that don't press us, I don't want Declan Rice to be the guy who is standing between the midfield and defensive line predominantly where the spaces aren't there. He's not someone who's going to receive on the back foot, turn, and open the game up. He thrives when the spaces open up when he's playing higher up. I would rather him be behind the ball in the final third where he is in a position where he can shoot on sight and he can rack up the volume that is going to allow him to get close to 10 Premier League goals. I think Declan Rice is that good to be able to hit that tally. But also, I think when it comes to other players like Ethan Nwaneri, who I think is going to have a massive season next year, we need to use Ethan in a way that maximizes his skill set, where if he's playing right wing, which I'm happy for him to do so, to become Bukayo Saka's understudy there, to give us something stylistically similar in the sense of both being left-footed. But the reality is that they're two different players in terms of what their best qualities are. So you need to facilitate that, and you need to make sure that you're not playing Ethan in the way that you would play Bukayo at right wing. You know, you need more impetus from the right back to overlap and give you that thrust down the wide areas to allow Ethan to come inside and to give us that unstoppable quality in which, when we're talking about Arsenal being shot shy, you know, especially in game states where we're drawing that we mentioned, someone like Ethan Nwaneri, getting him in that sort of environment, it's certainly going to help us, and he's got fantastic quality there. So there's a lot of things, I think, that we can take into 25-26 that we can improve on, both externally with the signings, but also internally in terms of player usage. And that's where I stand on it. You know, and there are fantastic things that Arsenal still do. You know, I think we shouldn't ignore that in terms of defensively off the ball. That is the one thing that has been consistent in Mikel Arteta's tenure. And that's why I do think that the gap isn't that big. And, you know, with greater health, more luck there, and increasing the quality in certain areas, we'll be there and thereabouts for sure. So, yeah, any more closing thoughts that you've got, George?
No, you summarised it really well there. And I think, you know, particularly around, you know, you mentioned Rice and Nwaneri as well. And I guess it's trying to find solutions in the absence, and this is obviously one of the things you referenced that we went through, of having that inevitable killer.
Yeah.
And again, you know, that I've when it comes to sort of, you know, things that you want to improve on, it's rather than being a club currently that has maybe 10 things to fix, at least in our case, it's sort of, and using the data to help support some of the stuff that we've gone through, it feels sort of like it's the thing to fix is known. And once it's known, it's then much easier to sort of find solutions. But I think that solution is going to be in the market for forward still. So yeah, it is where we're at.
Yeah, and then that's where, you know, we're talking about other things outside of the tactical details of clusters of poor results, you know, needing to prevent that. And, you know, as we discussed already in terms of our ability to react during adversity. But yeah, you know, it's not been the season that we wanted for sure. But it's been, you know, a very enjoyable one from a data point of view to be able to dive into this. And we've like I said, we've got a portfolio of different episodes looking at different things. And, you know, we want this to be a common theme going into the next season as well. We're going to look to try and implement something in the summer as well, if anything interesting comes through. And we want you guys to be the drivers there in terms of giving your opinions, your thoughts, and questions on things that you want us to see in future episodes. And yeah, I've really enjoyed it. And as I mentioned already at the start of this, you can access it by becoming a Patreon or YouTube member via the free trial within the description. And again, you know, there's a lot of content going around in terms of Scouted, and you can get ad-free main pods, TCP Live, etc. So many different things. And yeah, been very enjoyable for sure doing it alongside you, George. And yeah, hopefully you guys have enjoyed this segment. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the data pods that we've been putting out on the Patreons for YouTube and Patreon members. And yeah, we're going to be here next season for sure. So thank you for tuning in. If you do like this video, give it a like, share, subscribe, do all that wonderful stuff. And yeah, last but not least, thanks for keeping it Arsenal.